You wake up, reach for your phone, open your banking app like every other morning. The familiar numbers pop up on the screen. Checking balance, savings, the money you've scraped together over years. You exhale a little. I'm not rich, but at least I'm safe. Now imagine a notification pops up right after that. According to a new law effective from midnight, the cash you currently hold is no longer legal money. From now on, you may only exchange a small portion into the new currency. The rest will be canceled. No hacker. No war. It's the law. One signature. One late-night meeting. And the next morning, an entire country wakes up to realize cash, the thing they believed was the safest, has died. Sounds like a movie script, right? But financial history has seen this scene many times. And the scariest part isn't that it happened. It is that most of the people who lost everything looked exactly like you do today. They believed cash is king. They believed money in a state bank is the safest. They believed the government would never dare do that. By the time they understood, they were already several hours too late. This video is called The Day Cash Died, How One Law Wiped Out a Nation's Savings. Because that was exactly what happened. A single law in a single night erased decades of savings for an entire people. And if you think that only happens in wartime, in some faraway, messed-up country, stay to the end. Because what happened to them is basically a first draft of what can absolutely happen to money systems today. Let's start on a day in May 1953, in a small country in Central Europe, Czechoslovakia. On the surface, it was a normal day. Workers went to factories, teachers to schools, pensioners to the market with wrinkled Koruna notes in their pockets. But behind closed doors in Prague, a plan was being finalized. Not a plan to build a bridge or sign a treaty, but to replace all the money in the country. And not a nice cosmetic replacement. Swap one for one, new notes, same value, but a full-scale surgery on debt and trust. If you had a little cash under the mattress, you'd lose some of it. If you'd spent your life faithfully putting savings into the state bank, you'd lose most of it. And if you were the kind of person who held large amounts of cash, a bourgeois hoarder, speculator, according to the vocabulary of the time, you'd be nearly wiped out. On the evening of May 30th, 1953, the government suddenly announced over the radio. A monetary reform was happening immediately. From a specified time, the old Koruna notes would cease to be legal tender. Citizens could exchange their old money for new, but under very innovative rules. A small initial portion would be exchanged at a soft rate. The bulk would be exchanged at a brutally harsh rate. For example, wages and certain income might be converted at 1/5, but any cash hoard above a certain threshold could be converted at something like 50 old Koruna for one new Koruna, or simply not exchanged at all. Bank deposits were also tiered. Below a small limit you might retain something like your value. Above that, you were sacrificing for the common good. Now imagine how that felt for a retired worker named Carol. He'd spent his whole life in a state factory, putting a little into the state bank every month, because he believed the People's Bank of the People's government is the safest place for money. He never bought gold. He never went to the black market. He trusted official money. On the morning of June 1st, he stands in line at the bank to exchange his savings. The clerk pulls out the conversion chart. Savings above X Koruna will be exchanged at Y1. He does the math in his head and feels his knees go weak. Half, 2/3, maybe more, gone with a single formula. No thief, no armed robbery, no bomb, just reform. We usually think of cash as the last thing standing even when everything else collapses. Your house burns down, your stocks go to zero. At least you've still got a stack of notes in your hand. But on that day in Czechoslovakia in 1953, people discovered a chilling truth. If the state issues, distributes, and controls all paper money, it also has the power to kill that money overnight. Cash in a drawer turned out not to be freedom. It was a contract, one where one party could tear it up at will. You might ask, why would any government do something that cruel? As always in financial history, the answer isn't just cruelty, it's cornered. After the war, after nationalizations, after years of price controls, the Czechoslovak economy was distorted. The black market was booming. There was too much cash chasing too few goods. The state wanted to crush speculation, suck money out of circulation, reduce inflation pressure, and restore control. And the fastest way wasn't deep structural reform. It was a punitive currency reform. But on the ground, the official reasons mattered a lot less than the result. People poured into the streets, formed endless lines outside banks and exchange points. Nobody knew exactly how much they'd get. The rules were vague, deliberately changed at the last minute to prevent leaks. In some places, protests broke out, even riots. Trust, that invisible backbone of any monetary system, cracked. Those who had believed money issued by the state is the safest thing started whispering about gold, about foreign currencies, about anything that couldn't be erased by a midnight law. At this point, you might think, glad I didn't live there. That was the old days. Now we have independent central banks, rule of law, modern systems. But remember, only a few years ago, in India, a massive democracy with a growing financial system, people experienced a softer version of the day cash died. On the evening of November 8, 2016, Prime Minister Narendra Modi appeared on television and calmly announced, from midnight, all 501,000 rupee notes, about 86% of all cash in circulation, would no longer be legal tender. The stated goal, fight black money, corruption, and counterfeiting. People were allowed to bring old notes to banks and exchange them for new ones over a limited period, with rules and caps. Technically, this wasn't tea confiscation the way Czechoslovakia did it in 1953. If you could prove your income and get to a bank in time, you could exchange your cash. But put yourself in the shoes of a small shop owner in an Indian town. Your wealth isn't in some sleek online investment account. It's the notes in a battered safe behind the counter, the 500s and 1000s that customers have handed you for years. You're not orchestrating grand tax evasion. You're simply doing what an entire cash-based economy does. In one evening, the stuff you use to buy inventory, pay wages, feed your family, keep the lights on was declared worthless unless you managed to swap it. The next day, you stand in line for hours, day after day. Your shop is empty because customers have no small notes, no new money, no confidence. On the macro level, India in 2016 didn't wipe out all savings like Czechoslovakia in 1953. But it proved something important. In a system where the state tightly controls paper money, it can neutralize that money almost instantly with a political decision. And the people hurt most weren't necessarily the ultra-rich, who already held assets abroad, gold, property, but small traders, workers, the obedient middle who kept their savings in cash in state banks. Sound familiar? If we dig deeper, we see this pattern repeat. The Soviet Union in 1947. After World War II, the Soviet government carried out a monetary reform, exchanging old rubles for new. Again, the design was meant to punish those who hoarded cash and operated on the black market. Cash was exchanged at 10-1, but bank deposits received more favorable treatment under certain thresholds. The official narrative: punish profiteers, crush the black market, stabilize prices. In practice, countless ordinary people who'd saved in cash, because they didn't trust banks, because of war, because of habit, suddenly found themselves treated like criminals. Or look at several Latin American countries in the 1980s and 1990s. Hyperinflation exploded. Governments launched stabilization plans by changing currencies, chopping off zeros, freezing bank accounts, imposing withdrawal limits. Some programs even froze a huge portion of bank deposits, promising to pay them back years later in bonds or in drips, all in the name of saving the economy. Imagine you've been putting money aside for 20 years to retire. One morning you get a message. Your money is still there, but for now we're holding it. You can only withdraw a little each month. By the way, prices at the market are going up daily. That too is a version of the day money died, not because the note stopped being legal tender, but because your ability to use your savings was stolen. What do all these stories share? First, they didn't just happen in weak, chaotic countries. They happened in states with very strong, organized governments, often driven by big ideals. Second, the reasons always sounded reasonable. Fight corruption, fight speculation, save the economy, stabilize the currency, protect the poor. Third, the people most brutally damaged were rarely the ultra-rich, those with lawyers, offshore accounts, gold, hard assets. It was usually the hard-working middle, the ones who believed in clean money, who trusted the people's bank, who did everything right. So what does any of this have to do with you? Someone living in the age of online banking, cards, e-wallets, even crypto? More than you think. If the day paper money died was the crude version, then the day digital money got restricted is the refined version. If a government can use a law to kill cash, then in a fully digitized system, it's even easier to impose surprise rules. Withdrawal caps. Extraordinary levies. Negative interest account freezes. Bail-ins where depositors are turned into involuntary investors to rescue their own banks. Picture a modern version of the Czechoslovak reform. No radio broadcast this time, just a flood of push notifications. From date X, asset type Y, large denomination banknotes, undeclared deposits, balances above Z, will be subject to a special tax or converted into a new unit at rate A. B. No need to collect paper notes, no printing presses, just a few lines of code at the central bank and some database updates. But instead of just scaring ourselves, we have to ask harder questions. Why do governments get pushed into extreme decisions like killing money? And is there any way for ordinary people not to be the ones hit hardest each time the cycle repeats? The first factor is debt. States borrow, corporations borrow, households borrow. When the economy grows well, debt can take care of itself. Incomes rise, jobs are plentiful, old debt gets repaid from new cash flows. But when growth slows, when the economic structure is distorted, when budgets are stretched, debt turns into a stone around the neck. At that point, policymakers face a choice: slash spending and anger voters, raise explicit taxes and face revolt, or use creative financial tools to quietly shift part of the burden onto citizens without printing tax on the bill. Monetary reforms, inflation, freezing accounts, sudden levies. These are all versions of that. The second factor is trust and control. A monetary system only works if people believe in it. But every government fears losing control, fears the black market, dollarization, people hoarding gold, emerging parallel systems outside their reach. When the underground economy gets too big, when too much cash sits outside official channels, the temptation to reset by law becomes very strong. From the planner's point of view, it is a way of pulling everything back onto their balance sheet. Those who use official money are adjusted. Those who dodge the system are punished. The problem is, life is messier than a PowerPoint slide. The people most obedient, those who save in bank accounts, declare income, avoid shady deals, are usually the easiest targets. They can't run. They can't hide. They don't hold alternative assets like land, gold, or foreign currency. They are also the least psychologically prepared. They've believed in the system for so long that they can imagine the system turning on them. The third factor is short memory. After each killing of money, the generation that took the hit learns deeply from it. In many Eastern European families, even today, grandparents still talk about that currency reform with bitterness in their eyes, and the habit of hoarding gold, dollars, or tangible goods gets passed down. In Latin America, after bouts of hyperinflation, people treat inflation as a beast that can wake at any time. In India, many older people never fully trust the banking system again after deposit freezes and demonetization. But give it 1 or 2 generations and the memory fades. The new generation goes back to believing, money in the app is enough, salary in the account is all I need, the state would never do that again. That's the best soil for the next reset. So in a world where the day cash died is not just a story from the past, what can you actually do? You can't print your own money, you can't call the central bank, you can't stop your parliament from passing some law at 3 a.m. But there are 3 things you can control: how you spread your risk, how you read signals, and how you think about money. On spreading risk, history shows that the people who suffer most during currency reforms, freezes, and defaults are those who went all in on one type of asset tied tightly to domestic law. For example, 100% of their wealth in deposits at domestic banks, or 100% in local cash. By contrast, people who kept part of their wealth in forms that are hard to print and hard to erase by local law, gold, real assets in multiple jurisdictions, strong foreign currencies, fared less badly. That doesn't mean you should sell everything and buy gold. It simply means this: if your entire financial future depends on one line of digits in a system that one signature can rewrite, your risk is not small. On reading signals, Before the day money dies, there are always signs. Growth slows. Budget deficits balloon. Politicians start talking more about fair contributions, extra solidarity. Those who have too much must share. Real interest rates, interest minus inflation, drift negative. Rules around moving money across borders, buying foreign currency, buying gold, start tightening. That is not the time to panic, but it is the time to ask, what laws am I relying on? If those rules were suddenly rewritten, what happens to me? On how you think about money. Perhaps the harshest lesson from these stories is this: money is not neutral or unchanging. Money is a social contract and a political tool. For ordinary people, it's stored labor. For the state, it's a steering wheel for the economy, and sometimes, a subtle way to move wealth from one group to another. If you see money only as numbers in an app, you'll miss that power dimension. If you see it as a contract, one that can be rewritten, you'll be less naive when you read phrases like, in the public interest, necessary reform, currency modernization. The day cash died. How one law wiped out a nation's savings isn't just the story of Czechoslovakia 1953, or the Soviet Union 1947, or a night in India in 2016. It is a reminder that the line between my money and their policy is much thinner than you think. Today, that line might be crossed in a country halfway around the world. Tomorrow, it might be a notification on your banking app. If you want to look at your bank account, your cash, your digital money with the eyes of financial history, not to panic, but to be proactive, stick around this channel. We'll talk about other money killings, about how governments have cleverly or clumsily used debt, inflation, and currency reform to rewrite the story. And next time someone tells you, this money is safe, it's guaranteed by the state, you'll be able to calmly ask, safe like which money? In which country? At what point in the cycle? Because in the end, history doesn't repeat exactly. It changes the setting, changes the name of the law, changes the color of the notes. The script is almost the same. One day, someone signs a document and a whole nation realizes cash has died. The question is, do you want to be the person shocked, reading that news for the first time? Or the person who heard this story beforehand and quietly prepared not to be swept away with it?